The dense forest was eerily silent, except for the distant hum of insects and the occasional rustling of leaves in the cold night wind. David Carter adjusted his grip on his rifle, his heart pounding as he moved cautiously through the undergrowth. The distress signal had come from somewhere nearby. An unidentified object had crashed deep within the woods, triggering a full military response. He had seen his fair share of strange incidents, but this one felt different. There was no radio chatter, no signs of fire or smoke, just an unsettling stillness hanging over the place. His radio crackled to life. "Carter, you seeing anything?" came Sergeant Mitchell's voice. "Negative," David whispered back, his sharp eyes scanning the dense foliage ahead. "Wait, hold on. I see something." Up ahead, partially hidden beneath thick vines and shattered tree limbs, lay a sleek metallic pod, its surface shimmering faintly under the moonlight. Unlike anything David had ever seen, it had an otherworldly design. Smooth, curved edges, no visible seams or markings, and most unnerving of all, it was completely silent. No engine hum, no beeping systems, just an eerie quiet. David signaled to his squad to hold their positions as he cautiously approached. The air around the pod had an unnatural chill, and as he ran his fingers across its smooth surface, the metal felt oddly warm despite the cold air. Then, without warning, a faint hiss filled the air as a seam appeared in the pod's surface, and the door slid open. Inside was something David had not expected: a woman. Or at least she looked like a woman. Her tall, lithe figure was wrapped in a dark, form-fitting suit, her long, silver-white hair cascading over her shoulders. Her skin had a faint, unnatural luminescence, and strange metallic cuffs bound her wrists and ankles. But what struck David the most were her eyes. Deep violet, sharp and intelligent, filled with something between fear and defiance. Before he could react, she lunged at him. David barely had time to raise his rifle before she was on him, her movements a blur. He hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. The alien woman's hand wrapped around his throat, her grip cold and inhumanly strong. "Identify yourself," David gasped, struggling against her iron grip. Her eyes narrowed, her gaze flicking to the soldiers surrounding them. Then, just as quickly as she had attacked, she released him, her expression shifting to something unreadable. "Earth," she whispered, her voice carrying an unnatural echo. "This is Earth." David coughed, pushing himself up. "Who the hell are you?" Before she could answer, a sharp beeping sound filled the air. The alien woman's gaze snapped toward the sky, her expression instantly shifting to alarm. David followed her eyes and froze. High above the treetops, several dark shapes moved against the night sky. At first, they looked like stars, but then they shifted. Drones, cloaked and almost invisible, closing in fast. "Contact," Mitchell shouted. "Unknown hostiles incoming." The night erupted into chaos. The drones opened fire, streaks of blue energy lancing through the air. Trees exploded into flames, and the ground trembled as energy pulses struck the earth. David dove for cover, rolling behind a fallen log as his squad returned fire. The alien woman moved faster than any human David had ever seen. One second she was beside him, the next she was leaping into the air, twisting midair as energy weapons emerged from her wrists. She fired in rapid bursts, her shots precise, each one taking down a drone with uncanny accuracy. David didn't have time to be stunned. He grabbed his rifle and took aim, firing at the advancing drones. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and had no backup. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the attack ended. The remaining drones pulled back, disappearing into the darkness. The only sounds left were the crackling of burning wood and the heavy breathing of the surviving soldiers. David turned to the alien woman, who stood motionless, staring at the retreating drones. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "Who were they?" She exhaled slowly, lowering her weapons. "They came for me." David stared at her, his mind racing. This was no ordinary alien visitor. She was being hunted. And if those drones were after her, that meant whoever sent them knew she was here. "Soraya," she finally said, looking at him. "My name is Soraya." David didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. This was far bigger than just a simple crash landing. Something was coming. Something dangerous. And he had a feeling this woman was right at the center of it. The night air was thick with the smell of burning wood and ozone from the energy blasts. David wiped the sweat from his forehead, his grip tightening on his rifle as he turned back to Soraya. She stood in the middle of the clearing, her silver-white hair illuminated by the glow of the embers, her violet eyes locked onto the sky where the drones had disappeared. David's squad regrouped, their expressions tense and wary. None of them had expected to be thrown into a battle against unknown attackers, let alone to be fighting alongside an alien woman who had just fallen from the sky. "All right," David finally said, his voice firm but controlled. "I think it's time you start talking. Who are you, and why were those things after you?" Soraya turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just staring at him as if she were deciding whether or not to trust him. Then, with a slow exhale, she reached up and touched a device on her wrist. The sleek black cuffs on her wrists and ankles emitted a soft hum before unlocking and falling to the ground. Instantly, the air around her shifted. It was subtle at first, just a faint distortion, but then David felt it, a sudden weight, as if gravity itself had changed around her. A shimmering energy field flickered across her skin for a brief moment before vanishing. David took a cautious step back. What was that? Soraya looked down at the fallen restraints. "A suppression field," she said quietly. "It was limiting my abilities." David exchanged a wary glance with his team. "Abilities." Soraya's violet eyes met his. "I am not just any alien," she said. "I am part of a warrior caste, engineered, trained, and enhanced for battle. My kind does not crash by accident. I was sent here as part of an assignment. A test." David frowned. "A test?" Soraya nodded. "My people have been watching Earth for a long time, studying you. We were told that humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and primitive compared to the civilizations that exist beyond your world. I was sent here to observe, to see if you were truly the threat the Galactic Council believes you to be." David narrowed his eyes. "And what did you find?" Soraya hesitated. "That the truth is far more complicated than what I was told." Mitchell scoffed. "So what? You were spying on us." Soraya didn't flinch at the accusation. "Yes," she admitted, "but I was not meant to stay long. The mission was simple: gather data, return, and report my findings. But something went wrong. I was betrayed." David felt a knot form in his stomach. Betrayed by who? Soraya's jaw clenched. "My own people." Silence fell over the group. The crackling of burning branches was the only sound in the air as David processed what she had just said. "If you were working for them, why would they turn on you?" he asked. Soraya looked down at her hands, flexing them as if testing her strength. "Because I uncovered something I wasn't supposed to." David crossed his arms. "Which is?" Soraya met his gaze, her expression deadly serious. "That Earth is in danger, and your people don't even know it yet." David felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize when someone wasn't bluffing. Whatever Soraya had discovered, it had been enough for her own people to try and kill her. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything." Soraya took a slow breath. "There is an alliance in the stars, a coalition of powerful alien races that oversee entire galaxies. They determine which civilizations thrive and which are erased. They call it balance, but in reality, it is control. They fear disorder, and any species that threatens their order is either assimilated or destroyed before they can become a problem." David's stomach tightened. "And they see us as a problem." Soraya nodded. Humans are unpredictable. Unlike other species, you do not follow set patterns. You adapt, evolve, and refuse to be controlled. That terrifies them. So when they discovered Earth, they planned to watch, wait, and decide whether humanity would be allowed to exist freely, or if you would need to be eliminated before you became a threat. Mitchell let out a bitter laugh. Great. So we're on an intergalactic hit list. Soraya's gaze darkened. Yes. And my mission was to confirm whether or not you were truly dangerous. I was supposed to observe without interference, but I found something that changed everything. The Council had already made their decision. Your fate was sealed before my mission even began. David's hands curled into fists. They're planning an invasion. Soraya nodded grimly. Not just an invasion. A purge. The Council has done this before to other civilizations, planets that could have thrived, species that could have contributed to the galaxy. All wiped out before they had the chance. David's mind raced. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was extinction. Why tell us this? He asked. Why not just leave and save yourself? Soraya's violet eyes softened slightly. Because I learned something during my time here. Humanity isn't the mindless threat they fear. You are flawed, yes, but you are also resilient, compassionate, and capable of things they do not understand. And she hesitated. Because I no longer believe in their cause. David studied her carefully. Every instinct told him to be cautious, to treat her as a potential enemy. But something in her voice, something in her eyes, told him that she was telling the truth. So what now? He asked. If they already decided our fate, how long do we have before they make their move? Soraya's expression darkened. Not long. The attack drones tonight were just the beginning. A scouting force. They were searching for me, but now that they know I am with you, they will accelerate their plans. David exhaled sharply. We need to warn people. Get this to the higher-ups. Mobilize defenses. Soraya shook her head. It won't be enough. The Council doesn't fight wars like you do. They don't send armies to conquer. They erase. They will strike from orbit, wiping your cities off the map before you even know what hit you. By the time your leaders react, it will be too late. The weight of her words settled over the group like a thick fog. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Mitchell broke the silence. Then what the hell do we do? Soraya's gaze met David's, something fierce burning behind her eyes. We fight. David let out a bitter chuckle. You just said we don't stand a chance. You don't, Soraya said. Not the way you are now. But if you want to survive, if you want to stop them, you'll need to do something no species has ever done before. And what's that? Soraya stepped closer, lowering her voice. You need to become unpredictable. You need to fight like humans. Adapt, defy expectations, and strike before they even know what's happening. David stared at her for a long moment. The soldier in him told him this was impossible. A suicide mission. But the part of him that had fought and bled for his people, the part of him that refused to back down, felt something else entirely. Hope. All right, he said, gripping his rifle tighter. Then let's show them why humans don't go down without a fight. Soraya's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Now you're thinking like a warrior. The night around them was quiet again. The cold wind howled through the ruined landscape as David and Soraya moved swiftly through the darkened alleyways. The city, once a beacon of human resilience, now stood in eerie silence. Most people were unaware of the looming threat from the stars, but David could feel it pressing down on him like an invisible weight. They didn't have much time. Soraya's violet eyes scanned their surroundings, her body tense with a warrior's instinct. She had told them everything. About the Galactic Council's decision to erase Earth, about the enemy ships already on their way, and about the secret she had uncovered that had turned her from a soldier of the Council into a fugitive. But the worst part, she wasn't the only one who knew. Are you sure we can trust him? Mitchell whispered as he checked his weapon. The rest of their squad had set up a perimeter, watching every street and rooftop. If we're walking into a trap, I'd like to know now before we get vaporized. David exhaled. Colonel Briggs has been my superior for years. If there's anyone who can get this intel to the right people, it's him. Soraya didn't look convinced. Powerful men do not like to be told they are pawns in someone else's game, she murmured. Your leaders will not take this news well. David clenched his jaw. Then we make them listen. They pressed forward, their destination, a hidden military safe house just outside the city. If Briggs could get them access to Earth's defense network, they had a chance to fight back. It was a slim chance, but it was better than nothing. As they reached the entrance, David keyed in the security code. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and they stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with old computer terminals and outdated tech. At the center of it all stood Colonel Briggs, arms crossed, his sharp blue eyes flicking from David to Soraya. Captain, Briggs greeted, his voice unreadable. You sure took your time. David saluted. Sir, we have a situation. Briggs's gaze shifted to Soraya. I can see that. This the alien you told me about? David nodded. She has intel that changes everything. Briggs gestured for them to sit, but David remained standing. There was no time for formalities. He launched straight into the explanation. Everything Soraya had told him about the Council, the incoming attack, and the secret war being waged in the shadows of the galaxy. Briggs listened in silence, his expression never changing. But when David finished, the colonel finally spoke. That's quite the story, Captain, he said slowly. And you believe her? David met his gaze. With my life. Briggs sighed, rubbing his temples. You're asking me to convince the highest levels of command that we're about to be wiped out by an enemy we've never even made contact with. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Soraya stepped forward. It does not matter how it sounds. It is the truth. And if you waste time questioning it, your people will die. Briggs studied her carefully. And you expect me to believe that you, an alien, are suddenly on our side. Soraya's expression hardened. I have no reason to lie. If I wanted your world destroyed, I would not be here warning you. Briggs leaned back, exhaling. So let's say I do believe you. What's your plan? David exchanged a glance with Soraya. We need to activate Earth's orbital defense systems and prepare for an attack before they strike first. If we can show resistance, we might force them to rethink their strategy. Briggs nodded slowly. All right, I'll make some calls. But if we do this, we're going all in. No turning back. David nodded. Understood. Briggs turned toward the console, inputting security codes. The moment he did, alarms blared through the room. David's blood ran cold. Briggs looked up, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Captain, he said. Before David could react, the doors slammed shut, locking them inside. Red lights flashed across the walls as automated turrets lowered from the ceiling, their barrels humming with lethal energy. Mitchell cursed. Damn it, I knew this was a bad idea. David spun toward Briggs. What the hell is this? Briggs's face remained calm. Containment protocol. Soraya's fists clenched. You betrayed us. Briggs exhaled. I didn't have a choice. The moment you sent that message, higher-ups flagged it. They knew something was up. And then they contacted me. David's stomach twisted. Who? Briggs hesitated. The Council. Silence filled the room. They already have people here, Briggs continued. They've had operatives in our governments for years. When I sent your intel up the chain, I got one message back. Detain the alien and anyone who knows too much. David's mind reeled. You sold us out. Briggs's expression darkened. I saved Earth. Soraya stepped forward, her voice low and deadly. You are a fool. Briggs narrowed his eyes. Listen to me. They told me the truth. Earth was never going to be destroyed. The Council doesn't want war. They just want control. If we cooperate, we survive. We get technology, advancements, everything we could ever want. But if we resist, they wipe us out. Do you really want to gamble with humanity's existence?" David's hands trembled with rage. "You think surrendering is the answer? You think they'll let us live freely? They won't. They'll control everything. Our future, our children, everything we are." Briggs shook his head. "It's better than extinction." Soraya took another step forward. "You are a coward." Briggs sighed. "I didn't want this, David. But orders are orders." David's heart pounded. They were trapped. The room was locked down, and the council was already watching. If they didn't escape now, Earth would never stand a chance. Then, before anyone could react, Soraya moved. With inhuman speed, she lunged at the nearest turret, her hands glowing with a strange energy. She ripped the gun from its mount, twisting it toward the others. The turrets fired, but she dodged with unnatural reflexes, flipping through the air as energy bolts scorched the walls. Mitchell opened fire on the security panels, sparks flying as the locks short-circuited. Briggs shouted, reaching for his weapon, but David was faster. He slammed into the colonel, knocking the gun from his hand and pinning him against the console. "You're making a mistake," Briggs snarled. David's fist crashed into his jaw. "No, you did." Soraya took out the last turret, breathing heavily as the red lights flickered. Mitchell hacked the door, and with a final spark, it slid open. "Go, go, go." David turned back to Briggs one last time. "If we survive this, I hope you realize how wrong you were." Briggs spat blood onto the floor. "You won't survive." David didn't waste another second. He bolted out the door with Soraya and Mitchell at his side, the alarms blaring behind them. They had lost valuable time. The council knew they were a threat now. The purge was coming faster than expected. But if they were going to die, they would die fighting. The night sky was alive with fire. Streaks of energy cut through the darkness, illuminating the battlefield in flashes of red and blue. Earth's defenses had engaged the first wave of the enemy fleet, and explosions rippled through the clouds as ships collided in brutal combat. From the ground, it looked like the heavens themselves were at war. David stood on the rooftop of a battered military outpost, gripping his rifle as he listened to the comms chatter. The reports were grim. The orbital defense grid had taken down several enemy ships, but more kept coming. The Council had underestimated humanity's resistance, but that wouldn't last long. If they adapted their strategy, Earth's defenses would crumble. Soraya was next to him, her eyes locked on the sky. "They are testing your strength," she said, her voice tight. "This is only the beginning." David exhaled. "Then we make them regret it." Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. "Captain, we've got movement on the ground. Looks like drop pods coming in hot. ETA 30 seconds. David raised his binoculars. Across the city, metal pods rained down like meteors, slamming into buildings and streets. The enemy was deploying ground forces. The real fight was about to begin. "All units, hold your positions," David commanded. "We let them come to us. Make them fight for every inch." The streets below were lined with makeshift barricades, old cars and debris tacked high. Soldiers crouched behind cover, weapons at the ready. Civilians had been evacuated, but they all knew if they lost this fight, there would be nowhere left to run. The first pod hissed open, releasing a plume of steam. Then, with mechanical precision, the enemy stepped forward. They were nothing like the aliens humanity had imagined. No tentacles, no monstrous forms. They looked eerily human. Tall, armored figures with glowing eyes, their movements precise and calculated. They were the Council's elite enforcers, engineered for war. The moment their boots hit the ground, gunfire erupted. Earth's forces didn't wait for them to make the first move. Bullets tore through the night, striking armor and sending sparks flying. Some of the enemy soldiers fell, but others kept advancing, their energy shields absorbing the hits. David aimed and fired, his rifle kicking against his shoulder. One of the soldiers staggered back, his shield flickering before failing. A second shot dropped him, but for every one they took down, more kept coming. A massive explosion shook the street as an enemy walker emerged from a pod, its 4 mechanical legs crushing pavement beneath its weight. The machine swiveled, scanning for targets before unleashing a barrage of plasma fire. The building next to David erupted into flames. "Take out that walker," David shouted. A rocket streaked through the air, slamming into the walker's side. The explosion sent it stumbling, but it wasn't enough. It turned its cannons toward the source of the attack, one of their anti-tank teams positioned on a rooftop. Before they could reload, the walker fired. The rooftop was engulfed in fire, and the screams of dying men echoed through the comms. David gritted his teeth. They were getting overwhelmed. "Mitchell, tell me we have reinforcements." "Negative, Captain," Mitchell responded. "We're on our own out here." David cursed. If they didn't turn the tide soon, the city would fall. Soraya moved beside him, her eyes glowing with determination. "I can take out the walker." David glanced at her. "How?" She held up a small device. "My people use energy disruption tech. It will disable the machine's core, but I need to get close." David didn't hesitate. "I'll cover you." Soraya nodded and took off, moving with inhuman speed. David followed, firing at anything that moved. Plasma bolts scorched the ground around them as they weaved through the chaos. Soraya reached the walker's leg, planting the device and activating it. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the energy surged. The walker convulsed, its systems failing. Then, with a final, shuddering movement, it collapsed, sending dust and debris flying. A cheer erupted from the soldiers. David didn't waste the momentum. "Push forward. Drive them back." The tide was shifting. The enemy had superior tech, but humans had something stronger: desperation, resilience, and the refusal to surrender. They fought with everything they had, using guerrilla tactics, setting ambushes, and striking where the enemy was weakest. The battle raged for hours. The streets ran with fire and blood, but the enemy was slowing. They weren't used to this kind of resistance. The Council had expected Earth to fall quickly. They had underestimated humanity's will to survive. Then, as dawn began to break, the comms crackled with a new voice. "This is General Carter to all surviving units. We have word from our deep space scouts. The second wave is coming, twice the size of the first." David's heart sank. They had barely survived this attack, and now an even larger force was on the way. He looked at Soraya. "How do we win this?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully. "The Council does not tolerate prolonged war. If we can hold out long enough, if we can make the cost too high, they may reconsider." David clenched his fists. "Then we give them a war they'll never forget." The battle wasn't over. The real fight had just begun. The sun had barely risen, but the battlefield was already drenched in smoke and fire. The distant hum of approaching warships sent a shiver through the remains of the resistance forces. The first wave had nearly broken them, but now the second was coming, larger, deadlier, relentless. David stood in the center of the ruined city, gripping his rifle, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. Around him, soldiers were reloading weapons, reinforcing barricades, and preparing for what they all knew might be their final stand. There was no retreat, no reinforcements. This was it. Soraya stood beside him, her alien armor scratched and burned from the fight. She had chosen to stay, to fight for Earth, to fight for him. But even she knew what they were up against. The Council's fleet would not stop until every last human resistance was erased. Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. "Scouts report incoming dropships. ETA 5 minutes. This is gotta be bad, Captain." David exhaled sharply. "We already knew that. Get everyone in position. We hold this line, or we die trying." Soraya placed a hand on his arm. "David, we have another option." He turned to her, eyes hard. "What option?" "Surrender. You know that's not on the table." She shook her head. Not surrender. A strike. If we can reach the enemy command vessel and disable their control systems, we could disrupt their entire invasion force. The Council's armies rely on centralized coordination. Cut off the head, and the body will stumble. David stared at her. It was a suicide mission. The command vessel was in orbit, heavily guarded. But she was right. Fighting on the ground wasn't enough. They had to break the enemy where it mattered. Mitchell's voice came through again. Captain, incoming. David didn't hesitate. Hold them off. Soraya and I are taking a strike team to the spaceport. Mitchell hesitated. You better have a damn good plan. David gave a grim smile. We do. Just try not to die before we pull it off. They moved fast. The spaceport was heavily damaged, but a few ships were still operational. A small transport vessel was all they needed. Soraya worked quickly, overriding the security codes, and within minutes they were airborne, breaking through the atmosphere with enemy fighters in pursuit. The command vessel loomed ahead, a monstrous structure floating in the darkness. As they approached, the ship's defenses activated, sending plasma rounds streaking toward them. Soraya gripped the controls, dodging through the chaos as alarms blared. David and the strike team held on, weapons ready. They had one chance. If they failed, Earth was finished. Soraya guided the ship toward a docking port, forcing it in with a hard landing. The moment the doors opened, they stormed inside. Enemy soldiers turned in surprise, but David and his team cut them down with precise shots. There was no time for hesitation. They fought through the corridors, moving fast, pushing toward the command center. The ship was massive, but Soraya knew the layout. She led them through maintenance tunnels, bypassing heavy resistance. Then they reached it, the control room. Inside, high-ranking officers turned in shock. The Council's elite forces were here, waiting. A brutal firefight erupted. Plasma bolts flew in every direction. Soldiers fell on both sides. David moved with pure instinct, dodging, firing, taking down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Soraya fought beside him, her movements fluid and deadly. But the enemy was strong. One by one, David's soldiers fell. Mitchell's voice came through the radio, urgent. David, the second wave is hitting us hard. We're not gonna last much longer. David gritted his teeth. He had to end this. Soraya reached the control console and began working. I need time, she shouted. David covered her, firing at anything that moved. His rifle overheated. He grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and kept fighting. A council officer lunged at him with an energy blade. David barely dodged, countering with a brutal strike to the throat. Soraya, he yelled. Almost there, she cried, fingers flying over the controls. Then, an enemy soldier raised a weapon, aimed directly at her. David reacted without thinking. He lunged, taking the shot meant for Soraya. Pain exploded through his chest as he crashed to the floor. Soraya screamed. With a final command, she activated the disruption sequence. The ship trembled. Warning sirens blared. Across the battlefield, the enemy forces faltered, their coordination breaking apart. The attack was working. Soraya dropped beside David, hands shaking. Stay with me, she whispered, pressing against his wound. David coughed, blood on his lips. Did we do it? She nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, the invasion is failing. You did it. David smiled weakly. Then it was worth it. The ship shuddered violently. Explosions rippled through its structure. They had to get out. Soraya pulled David up, half carrying him as they ran. The surviving team followed, racing against time. Their transport ship was still docked, barely functional. They climbed aboard, engines roaring to life as the command vessel began to collapse. As they broke free, the view outside was breathtaking. The once mighty fleet was in chaos, ships colliding, losing control. Earth's forces were rallying, pushing back. Mitchell's voice came through, breathless. You crazy bastard. You actually did it. David let out a weak laugh. Told you. Soraya held on to him, her expression unreadable. The war wasn't over, but they had won this battle. And for now, that was enough. The dust had settled. The battle that had raged for months was finally over. The last remnants of the alien invasion fleet had retreated, and the remaining forces were mopping up the final pockets of resistance. Earth was bruised, battered, but not broken. People walked the streets in disbelief, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. The war was over, and humanity had won. David stood on the balcony of the makeshift command center, overlooking the ruined city. It had been their base of operations during the final push, but now, it felt like a distant memory. The fires were out, the smoke had cleared, and the world had an air of stillness to it, a stillness that carried the weight of everything that had been lost. His chest ached, not just from the wounds he'd sustained, but from the memories of the comrades they had lost along the way. He hadn't expected to make it out of the war alive, yet here he was, standing with his back to the city that had given him everything. But there was one thing that kept him grounded, something that was more important to him than even the victory itself. Soraya. She stood beside him now, her eyes scanning the horizon. The alien woman, warrior, friend, and now something more, had become an integral part of his life. But even now, after all they had gone through, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. There was a bond that ran deeper than any he had ever known, a bond that no war could destroy. Soraya. David spoke her name softly, his voice almost a whisper against the silence of the moment. The battle's over. You can leave now. Her gaze turned toward him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. She didn't answer immediately, as though weighing her words, as though thinking about the very thing that had crossed David's mind. "I don't want to leave," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. "Not now. Not ever." David turned to face her, eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "But your people, your world, don't you need to return? There are other planets that need you. You've given everything to this war. You've sacrificed so much." Soraya's face softened, the alien warrior that had once been so detached now showing a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "I gave everything to this war because it was the right thing to do," she said. "But now I'm here for something else. For you." David swallowed, his heart racing in his chest. He had known there was something between them, something strong, something undeniable. But hearing it from her mouth felt like a jolt to his very core. "You don't have to stay," he murmured. "You've done enough, Soraya. Earth will rebuild. It's your time to go home." Soraya's expression remained unchanged, but her voice held a note of finality that made David's words falter. "I don't want to go back. Not to my world. Not to my people. I have no place there anymore. Here with you is where I belong." David took a step back, his mind racing. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared himself for it. He had thought, after the war was over, they would go their separate ways. He never imagined that Soraya, the powerful alien who had fought for humanity's survival, would choose to stay on Earth, to stay with him. "But your life, your duties, your family, you've been raised to lead, Soraya. How can you throw that all away?" Soraya took a deep breath, a look of quiet strength in her eyes. "My family is no longer the one I was born into. My duty is no longer to an empire that cares nothing for me. My life." She paused, her voice faltering for just a moment. "My life has always been about finding purpose. I found it when I chose to fight for this planet. And now, I found it again. With you." David stood there, struck speechless by her words. He had always known there was a connection between them, but this was something entirely different. He couldn't quite wrap his mind around it. The idea of an alien warrior, a princess, someone so far beyond him in every way, choosing to stay on Earth with him, it felt unreal. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That you want to live here. On Earth. With me. Soraya nodded, a slow, almost serene motion. Yes, if you will have me. David's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected this kind of confession, but as the words sank in, a warmth spread through his chest. The thought of Soraya, his warrior, his partner, and now, more than that, staying with him on Earth, was something he couldn't deny. There was no other place he wanted her to be. I don't know what to say, he stammered, his mind overwhelmed with the weight of her words. You're offering everything. A new life. For me. For us. Soraya reached out, her hand brushing gently against his. I'm not offering you anything you didn't already earn, she said softly. You gave me the chance to see the world through different eyes. You saved my life. I want to build a future here. With you. No war. No battles. Just peace. Together. David felt his pulse quicken. Could this really be happening? Could he truly find peace after all that they had been through? Could he really share a life with someone like Soraya? Someone who had once been an alien, a stranger to his world. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, he saw nothing but truth and sincerity. The war had taken so much from them both, but it had also given them something precious, a bond, a connection that could not be broken. I don't deserve you, David said, his voice thick with emotion. Soraya smiled, a small but genuine smile. You deserve everything, David. I don't need anything more than this. You and me here. Together. Earth is our home now. A silence fell over them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, comforting. For the first time in a long while, David felt a sense of calm that he hadn't known during the chaos of the war. He wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, he never would be again. We'll make it work, he said finally, a soft laugh escaping his lips. We'll build something better. Together. Soraya's smile widened, and for the first time, David felt like everything was right. No matter the hardships ahead, no matter what the future held, they had each other. And that was all they needed. As the sun began to set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the world, David and Soraya stood together, side by side. The war had ended, but their journey was just beginning. They had won not only a battle but a chance at a new life, one where they could finally be free to build something beautiful, something of their own. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, David realized that no matter where their journey took them, he would always have Soraya by his side. The beginning of something new was here, and it was a beginning they would face together.